Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video I'm going to be painting up one of the new miniatures from the Operation Sandtrap Battle Pack. This is a new box and accompanying book for Infinity N5 by Corvus Black, and they're sponsoring this video, so they sent us through the battle pack to paint up. I've chosen the JSA, the Japanese Secessionist Army. If you like the other guys, the Pano, then Andy painted them up last week, and I'll link that video up there. But yeah, I chose the JSA because I just think they're amazing, amazing minis. This pack's on pre-order at the moment, and you get a couple of pre-order exclusive minis as well. And I need to get hold of that JSA one because it's just awesome. And when I was sat sort of wondering about how to paint, I was sort of umming and ahhing, and in the end I just thought, do you know what, just get stuck in. Sometimes I plan meticulously. This one I just couldn't work it out, and I thought, build the minis and just get some paint on it and see where it goes. And it ended up being this incredibly enjoyable, just different way of approaching it. I thought, what better time to try some different approaches than with some completely different miniatures that I'm used to painting. So we'll cover a little bit of working with metal miniatures, then I'll go through the whole process of how I've got him painted up. I hope you enjoy. Let's paint. So I know that some people can find working with metal miniatures a little bit off-putting. And I just wanted to address sort of my thoughts on the whole thing. And for me, if I like the minis enough and I like the game enough, metal by no means will put me off the project. The cleaning processes are very, very similar to whether you're working with resin or whether in fact you're working with plastic. You're still going to be using your hobby knife, you're still going to be using clippers, you're still going to be using some sanding pads or some files to tidy things up. There's just a few, I suppose, sort of key differences to be aware of. One of the huge pluses is there tends to be far fewer bits, which means building the models tends to be a lot quicker than, you know, building these multi-part plastic kits. But where you do have the mold lines, sometimes they take a little bit more than simply gently scraping the knife across to get rid of. So scrape it across, give it a bit of a polish with some sanding paper. I use this sanding sponge by Tamiya. I love it. Then you might have to go back in and do it again, but it's exactly the same idea. You know, you pull the knife across it, as it were, and then I'm just sort of buffing it really with the sandpaper to smooth it out nicely. For me, the biggest difference, I suppose, when I'm working and building the metal miniatures is I try to be an awful lot more clean and careful, because I just don't want these metal shavings all over the place, and I don't just want to blow a bit of plastic off the table. You don't want to blow it with a metal because it's going to go everywhere. So I work with these in a very, very similar way to the way I would work when I was building a resin miniature, and that's just keeping it neat and tidy, contained, and making sure I dispose of the stuff so I'm not sat in all the sort of detritus left from cleaning it. And then of course the biggest difference, I think anyway, is you're going to probably want to do some pinning. So pinning is where we use a little bit of usually metal rod, brass rod often, which you'll see me use in this video, but sometimes people just use paper clips, whatever. And you will drill a hole in two connecting pieces, and you will use a piece of this rod to go between those two, so into both pieces, and strengthen that bond. You're still going to want to super glue it, but the pin will help strengthen that bond. And these minis are heavier. And if you do knock them, there is a chance that you're just going to knock the piece off. So this is how I've always gone about pinning things. I can't think what it was. It would have been back in the days when it was forums. I'd have seen someone pinning something probably on Bolter and Chainsaw or something like that back in the day. And it's just the way I've always done it. So I drill the hole in the first piece, pop a piece of blue tack in between where the join's going to be, then press the pieces together, hold it there for a couple of seconds. And then very carefully, we're going to remove the piece. This is such a cool mini, this Raiden mini. I wanted to get this one done as well for the video, but I didn't have time. But yeah, I can't tell you how much I like these miniatures. But you see, when we pull it apart, you're left with the indent of where the hole is in the other piece. So I find this is the simplest way to make sure that the holes will always line up. Now, there is another way when you're building much larger miniatures. Sometimes you glue the piece together and then you will drill into that. So for instance, when I built Titans, that's how I would do it. You drill through the pieces once they were together. But this is what I'll do 99% of the time when pinning things like arms or backpacks or stuff like that. So we clean it up, drill through where that little nubbin's poking out, the sort of negative, as it were, of where the hole is in our other piece. Remove that blue tack. So always being nice and neat and careful, and then just finish drilling out. My buddy Todd sent me a an electronic pin vice drill thing. It's amazing, but when I'm using it with metal, I would rather just use a hand drill like this. So just to control the speed, just to make sure there's not bits of metal, flying all over the place. So now we know the two holes are going to line up nicely. I'll take a little bit of brass rod. I'm afraid I don't know what size this is. I just bought a pack of it, slightly bigger than a paperclip. I suppose I really ought to measure that. Glue it into the one piece, snip it off. Again, being careful, because if you ping it off with your clippers, it's going to fly off. Don't use your nice side cutters to do this with, or your clippers that you want to keep a sharp edge on. Just use an old pair of clippers that you don't mind blunting. Then we use a little bit of super glue in between the space, line them up, and we should be good to go. Hold it in place for a couple of seconds, and we're all good. And I would repeat this process, for instance, if I was pinning the model to the base as well, which is exactly what I did. So I laid a piece of blue, drilled the feet, laid a piece of blue tack over the base, pushed the model down. Now I know where the two holes are that I need to pin it with, which means when it comes to popping the miniature in, there's no sort of having to fiddle around, which means you can do it after you can paint the model off the base, or you can paint the model on the base. It's always going to be lined up properly. So here I've just primed them. I think I used Colour Forge, matte black, maybe on this one. Whatever black primer I'm currently using, it's that or Chaos Black. And I'm very, very excited about you getting stuck in. I really am. I just wanted to touch on the metal thing. Infinity do also produce, or Corvus Belli do also produce a bunch of miniatures for Infinity in this plastic. So this is a miniature to go along with the animation series they've done. That's how it comes out of the box. It's built, it's ready. It is absolutely perfect. I wish all of the miniatures were like this for that game, because it's fantastic. So I know the tag Andy showed last week and the tag that go with these guys is in that as well. But anyway, it's proper pucker stuff. Let's crack on with the painting. So as I mentioned in the intro, I'm kind of making this up as I go along with this paint job, so it might not be quite as structured as some of the other tutorials. To begin with, after priming the miniature, I thought, right, give them a zenithal highlight, and this will just help me understand what exactly is going on with these minis. Now to do this, I've used my favourite white with the airbrush. I've used Tamiya flat white. The little F that you saw on the pot there, that's the flat white. So XF2 is the flat white, X2 would be the glossy version. We need to use Tamiya thinners when we're using Tamiyas as well, or a solvent-based thinner like this, an alcohol-based one. And I felt it would be awfully remiss not to use one of our signature series Infinity bare brushes to paint my Infinity miniatures with. So that's what I'm doing. Now, I've thinned this about 2 to 3 drops of thinner to paint. I'm spraying about 20 to 25 PSI. You're going to need to adjust those things depending on the environment in which you work with your airbrush. But I'm doing quite a drastic, exaggerated, almost sort of top-down, maybe slightly pulled forward zenithal highlight. You could absolutely do this with a rattle can. It's the last time I'm going to use an airbrush in this tutorial. So the first thing I was like, right, how am I going to paint his trousers? I want them to be grey. Not quite sure what to do. Black Templar is one of the first generation of contrast paints. I love using it for like the connective bits on a marine. As you see, when you just paint it over a pre-shade like this, it just gives you this lovely grey. It's perfect. It's not black at all. But I thought, yeah, that should work pretty well with these. The sculpt's got all these lovely folds in them. It's also got some nice large flat areas, and I thought, you know what, this will work pretty well, I reckon. So I thinned it down ever so slightly with water on my wet palette, and I've just been careful as I brush it on to make sure that I'm trying to end all my brush strokes in any little recesses. Now for the armour itself, I was like, well, I quite fancy going for a kind of ivory look. And you can see I've tested it out on this little crotch piece there. And I thought, you know what, that looks pretty cool. Let's see what it does on the rest of the miniature. So straight over the pre-shade, I'm using a thinned down skeleton Horde, which is another contrast paint. Again, just thinned with water. And this video isn't sped up, actually. I think this is real time. I'm just taking my time working around each panel and ensuring when I finish my brush stroke, it finishes in a recess. It just means you don't end up with those little blotches that you might get on some of the flat surfaces. As I said, the idea there is to just tint, filter, stain, whatever you want to call it, the surface. So it's off-white. You know, I say I wanted to go for a kind of ivory look to the armour rather than pure white. And start mixing in ivory here to begin with the highlights. And if you watched a few weeks ago, I did a video on some Harakoni Warhawks, and on their armour, I did this sort of scratchy build-up of paint. And the intention there was for it to look like battle damage, you know, really sort of hardened warriors, you know, constantly battled and repainted armour. And I thoroughly enjoyed the process itself. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could do something similar with these guys. But rather than it necessarily representing that style of, you know, battle damaged armour, I thought, can I just paint in that way, which is a little bit messy, a little bit scratchy, put the highlights roughly where they should be and see what happens. And that's precisely what I've done. So by no means am I perfecting this technique. It's the first time I've ever done it on this video with this intention, but it's really fun. And I think it's something I'm going to explore a little bit further on some different models. But essentially all I'm doing is going in and doing these dashes and scratches and everything everywhere in the areas I think that the highlights would roughly be. But I'm also not getting too hung up on it. I'm sure I've put them in slightly the wrong placements somewhere on this mini. But the point is this mini's for playing games with. It's for enjoying myself and painting. I'm learning on it as I go. I'm not stressing about this being sort of a perfect display piece, so I don't have to get everything sort of right on it. So I just keep adding increasing amounts of ivory to the mix and reducing the areas that I do the highlight. Then I go back in with a skeleton horde and I do a little glaze all over the miniature of it again, just to keep bringing it back to that sort of sepia, ivory, browner tone to it. This is thinned really heavily. We're talking probably 3, 4, 5 parts water to contrast paint there. And it's kind of, again, before working panel to panel, so we don't get a big build-up of it anywhere in particular. And once that's dry, I now go back in with pure ivory and just work on the edges a little bit more. So here I'm still doing some of the highlighting, but the key with this stage really was to make sure I try and define all the panels, all the areas. I think particularly if I'm doing quite a messy, I don't know, is it a style? I don't know what it is really. But when I'm painting in quite a messy way like this, I felt it was important to make sure everything was as defined as I could make it on the miniature. So the recesses defined, the panels themselves are defined, so it doesn't just end up looking messy or sloppy, because that certainly wasn't the intention. It was quite a fast painting process, but it was still considered. As I say, I was kind of learning or discovering things about it as I went along. And I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm sure this style has a name, and I'm sure there's thousands of people that are phenomenal exponents of it. But I was kind of playing around with it for the first time, and I don't know why. I think it must have been that Harakoni video just kind of triggered something to have a go with. And I thought for his thigh plates, the thigh armour, I thought let's do something similar, but let's change the colour up a bit. And I've gone for black here. I've still kind of stuck to the colours of the box art for it, so the white, the black and the red. I've just kind of changed the tones of them a little bit more. So I've chosen to use Corvus Black here as the highlight. I like this, it's ever so slightly blue, which is perfect because I thought that would be a nice, you know, tone to add in next to the red that's going to be on the model. So again, I just followed that same process, defining the shapes themselves, placing that main highlight where the light would bounce off that slightly cylindrical thigh plate. Again, all the strokes themselves are quite haphazard, quite random in their directions. I'd be really interested to know your opinions on it in the comments. I say I wouldn't do this on every model at all, but having a little self-contained project like this Infinity Team to try it on and enjoy it on with basically no pressure other than the fact I'm sticking it up on YouTube for people to criticize. But other than that, you know, no pressure. I can't tell you how enjoyable it's been to do. So I've mixed in a little pale blue-grey here. I wanted to lighten it, but I also wanted to keep that blue going. That's an old Vallejo model colour now. I don't know if the new one is the same, but you can see the colour on screen, right? It's a pale off-white blue. You know, it does the job. Anything you've got that's similar will, I'm sure, be more than adequate. Again, just like with the pure ivory on the armour, this one I'm focusing more on defining all of those edge shapes. I say all, most of the shapes, most of the edges. But I also have left certain areas of this model almost completely black. Now, I've used a red here. I'm using our upcoming red from our upcoming paint range. See that? Believe that's going to be the campaign for that's going to start in January. That's what I've been told anyway. We'll see. Probably shouldn't have said that on the video, but there we go. But, you know, just grab any bright red you like. Again, no idea what I was doing, so I thought I'll put a stripe down here, start thin. I can always widen it if I want to. Yeah, you know, stick red wherever you want it. I, in the end, decided to put 3 areas, so I've done his crotch plate here, and then I've done both shoulder pads just to try and give that nice triangle on the miniature. And then I'm going back in with the ivory over the top, just doing some scritches and scratches, because, you know, it is meant to look battle damaged and weathered. It's just that is not the only reason to be doing the brush strokes in the way I am doing them. So, you know, the same when I'm doing hazard stripes, when I'm doing any kind of freehand write, you just start in the middle, nice thin line, and then widen the shapes out from there. I'm also terrible at getting things centered, so, you know, painting a bit rough like this takes the pressure off. For the very small bit of leather on his holster, not entirely sure if it's meant to be leather. I think it is in the artwork, actually. I just felt like popping a different colour on here. This is a real go-to recipe for me at the minute, or combo of browns. I just really like the colour on how they look, and I thought it would sit particularly nicely next to the other miniatures, next to the other colours rather, on this miniature. So Thondia Brown, and then I'm going to highlight it using Steel Legion Drab. Again, all the time, just lots of little taps and scratches. And unlike on the Harakoni, where I just painted the armour in this way, and certainly not as extreme as this, I painted the other elements in the miniature in the way I would often paint those elements in the miniature. Whereas on this figure, I've essentially tried to paint every single part of him in this style. For the rifle, I just fancied doing something a bit different to the black, and I thought quite a nice muted green would probably look pretty cool on the model. You know, we know that green works quite nice next to red. And also I felt that the green would probably work okay next to that. I'm going to call it ivory. I think it's probably a little bit too brown to be ivory, but you never know. But I thought just keep it real mellow, this green. Don't want it to stand out too much. Let's say exactly the same process. So I've just mixed in the lighter green here, and I'm putting all those scratches where I think the light will fall. And then once we've done that with a mix of the 2 greens, we'll go in with the lightest one and just do the edge highlighting. So you'll see that I haven't really done any blending, glazing to blend things together. Maybe a tiny little bit on the white, the ivory itself, but certainly not with the other areas, because it just doesn't, I didn't feel it was important on the model, and I don't think it takes anything away from it when it's been painted like this. Just trying to be careful where I pop the scratches, really. And if I muck any of them up, like I do in a second here, and I cover too large of an area with it, well, I'll just go in and do a bunch more of these little scratches around it, and I think it looked fine. There we are there, just a bit too big of a blob. Now, there's a little bit of chainmail on the model. I love it. I think it's a really, really cool feature. And I want to use the Metal Color series metal for that, and that's specifically because of the property you can see there. It's a very, very fluid paint, which means it comes off the end of the brush really, really easily. So I've got a very small brush here from my sort of metallics pot, really fine tip on it, tiny little bit of paint on the end of that brush, but it means I can go in and get these little areas, and I'm not worrying about having to push too hard to get the metal paint to come off and therefore accidentally hit other areas. I can just touch it to, and it almost just sort of wicks off. That is something to obviously be conscious of, because if I had too much of the paint on there and it wicks off so easily, then you're going to get it flooding in and causing build-ups and stuff. So dip it in on the palette, touch it off on a piece of paper, and I'm going in just using the tip here just to reach into those sort of hard to get to areas. And I know metallics perhaps haven't been, or true metallics haven't really been seen on Infinity box art. It's not really the style. I love them. I think true metallics are brilliant for gaming and for any models really. I just thoroughly enjoy looking at them. I love what they bring to a mini. So one of the last stages we're going to do here is a little oil wash. I've chosen to use sepia, a nice dark brown colour here, and I've thinned it using mineral spirits. 50-50 we start off with, and actually that's a nice dilution we got there. You don't want to put too much thinner in because you'll end up getting the paint separating and you get this nasty sort of bitty finish. I've just used normal DIY store mineral spirits for this video. That's because they evaporate very, very quickly. But normally if I'm doing my own hobby, I will use like an odorless artist grade spirit, something like Sansador by Winsor and Newton. They both work, they've just got different properties. So we haven't needed to varnish the model or anything like that. I've just made sure that all the paint is dry. So particularly that metallic paint that we've just put on there, just make sure it's properly dry before we go in and apply the oils. And you're not going to have any reactions at all between any of the products on there. And I'm not just slopping the oil all over. I'm deliberately sort of touching it to the recesses, letting that capillary action, so that the way that paint is drawn off the brush into the recesses, we get that because it's got that solvent base to it. Just letting it pull it into the recesses and just really help define all those areas on the model. Yes, it adds a bit of dirt and grime, but I actually think the Mini looks kind of dirty and grimy anyway because of the way I've painted it. So its primary function here is to add sort of definition. So if I just slopped it all over, what it would end up doing is filtering everything on there, making it all that little bit more dingy. And I don't want to do that. And yes, you can remove it if you want to, but why add a stage when we could just take a little bit more time here, be a bit more deliberate. I always find as well when you slop it all over and remove it, it's a very cool technique, that reductive technique, but I always find it still leaves a little bit of a stain behind, regardless of how much you clean it. So just being a bit more thoughtful with it here. Now, one of the cool little features in the artwork are these kind of magenta glowy bits on the model lenses, I guess. I've chosen to do these in a really nice sort of simple way. I'm going to use a white ink. I did a video a few weeks back about on just creating sort of a subtle glowy effect where we use inks and things like contrast paints for the effect. And essentially I'm using a very similar idea here, but I haven't added any sort of glow, as it were, to it with this. I'm just using the white ink because I know it's nice and strong, it's nice and dilute. Or thin, rather, dilute. It's nice and thin. Means I can just wash it into these very, very small areas, nice and easily. So I'm going to use Doomfire Magenta. This is a contrast paint, but honestly, it's basically just a magenta ink. This was already thinned at least 3 or 4 parts water to paint. And you can see how intense it still is when I'm painting it on here. But I just cover those areas that I've done with the white ink. And you notice there on the other side of his visor, I basically haven't done any highlighting at all, but I still want to put the magenta over there so it's got just a subtle kind of magenta to it. And then I mix in a little bit of the white ink with the magenta and just add a little highlight in there just to help it stand out a little bit more. Came together really fast, this Mini. Yeah, really, really happy. Like, I think probably 2 sessions, you're getting one of these done, you know, and you've got what? In a team like 8, something like that. Yeah, you're getting this done for gaming really realistically, in my opinion, and more importantly, having a ton of fun doing it. For the basing, I've just used a bit of texture paste, and then I've used that kind of sandy colour because Operation Sand Trap kind of felt I ought to. Then once that's dry, I'm giving the whole model a coat of matte varnish, Lucky varnish by MIG. It's actually got quite a satin finish, and I just really like the finish of it. I've done it at this stage simply before I put the pigments on because I don't want to blow pigments off when I'm using an airbrush. And this is just to unify the finish on the model, mainly because contrast paints have for my eye, quite an unpleasant finish to them. So I just wanted to change that using the varnish. It's nothing to do with protecting the miniature or anything like that. And then I'm going to use a couple of pigments. One, my absolute favourite, you'll see me use all the time, the natural sienna. And then this light ochre colour, just to help sell that kind of sandy look. I'm using a tiny amount of the pigment, as you can see here. I thought I'd leave the whole process in because I often get asked about it. And I'm really smooshing it in to the base. Because the base is nice and textured, because we're using so little of the powder, working it into all of those little crevices, it's going to be absolutely perfectly robust for doing gaming with. You're not going to get your carry case or your gaming board or anything covered in the powder when you're using as little as we are in this. Of course, by all means, you can use a fixed stiff. You could pop some airbrush thinner over there or some alcohol over there, or you could go and buy pigment fixer if you wanted, and that will help fix it in place if you're at all concerned. But I wouldn't be, and I won't be. This is how I will be gaming with this model. So yeah, there he is. I hope the tutorial, for want of a better word, was still simple enough and enjoyable enough to follow. I absolutely could refine what I'm doing here, but there was just no need. And I don't mean that from laziness. I just mean what I've ended up with is a model that I've been able to paint in relatively short space of time, that I've enjoyed every moment of the painting process, and I'm very, very happy with the end result. So for me, that just ticks all the boxes. And I think for results versus effort is huge for me on this Mini, which is a brilliant sort of indicator or motivator to get, you know, a small project done, you know, a gang, a team, a warband, a dungeon party, you know, whatever, because you're just enjoying every moment of that process. Yeah, it's really lovely to get back to Infinity. I played it and collected it years ago before we even started Cult, and yeah, it's just great to come back to it. So yeah, I'm really pleased Corvus Belli reached out. So if you are interested in it, go and check it out. I'll pop a link down in the description to it as well. If you've got any questions about anything I've done in the video, please pop them down in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as I can. A huge thank you to all of you that support us over on Patreon. If it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't be doing any of this, and it's massively appreciated. If for any reason you can't support us over there, likes, subscribes, comments, shares, all the usual stuff, it makes a huge, huge difference to small channels like ours. I do appreciate all of that as well. So yeah, let me know if you'd like to see some more Infinity and what in particular you'd like to see, and I reckon we're going to be doing plenty more of this in the future. So take care. I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com and maybe Ben can sort you out.